Frank Duncan and Sid Parsons are both drivers. Now, that's right?
Yes.
They're both drivers, and Mr. Harry Bailey's a conductor. But, Mr. Duncan, when you started, you weren't a driver, were you?
No.
What were you doing then?
I was a whistle boy then.
Well, what did a whistle boy have to do?
He'd have to sit on the front of the engine and blow his whistle at every opening on the way down, something like this.
That was on the way down?
That was on the way down, yes.
Well, what did you do on the way back? Because, I mean, the engine was at the back then, wasn't it? You were in the front.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Well, what happened on the way back?
Well, we had to look after the fire, keep a lookout as well, and look after the boiler, and sit on the shovel.
Sit on the shovel?
Sit on the shovel coming back, put the shovel on the coke and...
Yes. Well, that must have been a rather dangerous job. Were you in danger of falling off?
Well, it was dangerous rather, sitting on the front. Yes, I did slip off one morning, going down with the first train, and I landed in a pool of water. Of course, it was dark as a bag at the time, and the train kept on going, so I thought the driver didn't see me, so I had to...
That's bad news, is it?
That was bad news to the driver.
Yes.
He didn't know what had happened now. He didn't know it was blowing even. So they stopped the train and came back. I was on my way down to meet them. But they were concerned about whether I was all right or not. But I was all right, only a wet seat I got.
So that dried out pretty quickly, I suppose.
Oh, yes, that soon dried out. Back to the fire.
It must be a bit of a temptation sometimes, though, I imagine, in the old days, when you got down to the other end, say, to go and have a dip in the sea or something. Did you ever do that?
Yes, I did, actually. There was one time I was having a nice little swim. The water was as calm as ice, and I was enjoying myself. Lovely. So the whistle went on the engine, which drew my attention first of all. When I looked ashore, they were waving to me to come in ashore. So when I got in, the chaps from the pier was there with a message that the train had broken down up Black Pilloway somewhere, and to proceed at once. So I had to slip my trousers on and proceed. I didn't stop to wipe or anything.
Well, they didn't mind, I'm quite sure. You've got the engine there.
Yes, we got the engine there, and we got the train away as well.
Well done. Very good indeed. Well, now, I dare say that lots of interesting things happened, and I must assure you, listeners, that I've heard lots of interesting stories from our friends here, but I'd like you to tell us the story before you go, Mr. Duncan, of the gentleman who was lying there between the rails.
Yes, that happened one night with the last train up. Sunday night it was. The whistle went at the back. The guard was blowing up something like this.
That was really bad.
That was really bad then, 4 times. Yes. So we stopped, and the driver went back to see what it was all about. Well, of course, I had to stop on the engine. 2 of us couldn't leave the engine with a train behind it and passengers on. So afterwards, I learned that this man had fallen down off the end of the coach, down into the forefoot between the rails. Well, in the commotion, they had a job to get him out, fighting and the hell below there. So eventually they got a cab and got this man to the hospital. Well, when they got there, they went to help him out, opened through one door, and he slipped out through the other one and done a guy.
Maybe he'd had a drop too much and he'd just been lying there.
That's right, I expect so. He was all right anyway, must have been.
And if he's listening now, we'll tell him that he's forgiven, shall we?
Yes.
And Mr. Sid Parsons, he's had, what is it, Mr. Parsons, 50 years, isn't it?
Yes, 50 years.
And I think, too, that your family have had quite a connection with the railway, haven't they?
Well, my cousins have. W. Phillips.
Yes.
He's close on 54 years, I think.
Well, now then, Mr. Parsons, you are now a driver, are you?
I'm a driver now,
Yes.
yes.
What was your father doing?
He was driving the first grade off. When I got was ill health, he was in the maintenance shop over there.
I see. Mr. Parsons, we've already heard from Mr. Duncan that he was a whistle boy, and obviously there's a whistle boy here behind us, and that, of course, is part of the signalling system of this railway, because we're making this recording in the office. Now, do you agree with Mr. Duncan that his method of blowing the whistle was exactly as you used to do it when you were boys?
Well, I don't think so. Isn't the way I used to blow it?
No?
And we used to copy one another,
Yes.
more or less.
Well, you give us a demonstration, then. Now then, Mr. Duncan, is that better?
I don't think it's so clear as my blow.
Well, whether or not it was, they were both very good whistle boys indeed, I'm quite sure. And how long were you a whistle boy, Mr. Parsons?
About 4 years.
And then what?
And I went into the fitting shop across the way there.
Yes.
Local shed.
And what was the next step forward?
Well, I remained there for a number of years. And,
What then, a conductor?
No, I remained there then till electrification.
Yes.
Came over here then on the maintenance staff.
I see. Oh, you're not a driver yourself.
A driver now.
You're
yes.
a driver now?
Yes.
I see.
Yes.
Well, now, I'd like you to tell us the story, if you will, which I'm quite sure listeners will appreciate and forgive, of the old, possibly more free and easy days. A story you told me earlier on today about the gentleman who, when the train got up to Langland, or opposite the Langland Hotel, wasn't it?
Yes.
Of course, it took a bit longer in those days, didn't it?
Yes, yes.
Well, tell us what happened, if you will, please.
We had our coaches at Argyle Shed. Light engine had to go down now to fetch the coaches up. Well, it meant then I had to push the train back to Rutland Street, very quietly, of course. Well, the fireman on the guard used to ride on the front coach. When he's coming back now, opposite the Langland, the fireman dropped off. Of course, he's a driver now today. And it so happened that Mr. James, our manager in them days, was walking up the road and saw him going on the hotel. Well, as the engine got opposite the Langland, he popped out and jumped on the engine. In fact, the driver didn't know. That was a Mr. Duncan, the driver. That was a Mr. Duncan, yeah.
Oh, yes.
Well, anyhow, Mr. James came up to the office. He sent now for the driver and the fireman to come up to give an explanation of what he was doing in the pub. In the pub.
Yeah.
The fireman didn't know what to say. A lot of things, see? Yeah. When it was cigarettes, I suppose he told him, and till it happened again, he said, not to do them things on the job while you're on duty.
Right. Well, you couldn't do it today. It goes too quickly.
Oh, that's right.
But, of course, in those days, he had plenty of time to get off the train.
Plenty of time, that's right, yes.
Well, how long do you reckon it took him now to get off the train, go in, drink his drink, and join the same train?
Well, it taken the longest 3 minutes, that's all, anyhow, wouldn't it?
Probably a lot less. What do you think, Mr. Duncan?
Well, I think it must have taken him about a minute. It took the train a minute to run from the end of the coach to the engine. Probably had 12 or 14 coaches on.
Well, he must have been very accustomed to it. Yeah. Well, here's another long service character. 51 years not out so far, and looks as though he's going to do another 51, I'd say. Mr. Harry Bailey. He's from Mumbles. He started, not as the others, as a whistle boy and then going on to driver. But what exactly was your job when you first started, Mr. Bailey?
I started on the pier as a boy, young boy, and I was working what they call a camera obscura.
Good gracious,
a camera obscura.
Uh-huh.
That's showing all the views all around the hill, showing everything.
And how much did you charge them to come in?
Penny each at that time.
And how long did they stay in for a penny?
Well, they could stop in until they seen it all around.
Yes.
And then we made way for the next lot to come in, so that was waiting outside. That was my first job.
Yes.
I got 10 shillings a week for that.
And what did you go on to from that, Mr. Bailey?
I went on to the as I got older, I went on with the boats, taking the ropes, pulling the ropes in, berthing the boats at the pier, and in the toll box, taking the tolls, everything generally.
But of course, you were still employed by the same company.
Employed by the old company, Mumbles Railway Company, yes.
So what was your next promotion then? You left the pier?
I left the pier in 1913, and I joined the train, as a conductor. And I've been conducting ever since.
Well, now, I must tell you that years ago, I travelled as a boy on this train when it was steam-driven, and I remember seeing the conductors going along the edge, you know?
Yes.
And, of course, you don't have to do that today.
Oh, we don't have to do that today. We used to have to walk outside the train when the train was in motion.
That's right, yes.
And we had a toast rack that used to have to book that with our back to the road.
Uh-huh.
In the toast rack, it was all open car, you see. We
Yes.
had to book that, our back was to the road, but we had to book it.
What about that chap you were telling me about who was running alongside the train one day?
Oh, I was standing on the footboard after I finished my booking. It was our duty to stand on the footboard after we finished, come outside and stand on the footboard. And I seen a chap running alongside. He was one of the boys from the Ronda, you know. Yeah. And he shouted to me, he said, we had about 500 people on the train at the time. And he shouted to me and he said, hey, boss, he said, is my missus on that? Now I said, no, I don't know you, missus. And he said, and if I did, I couldn't pick her out this crowd. Well, he said, if you see her, he said, would you mind telling I'm gone up his house?
Fair enough. Well, you were supposed to be able to do a lot of things in those days. Occasionally, perhaps, the odd courting couple on board?
Oh, yes, we used to have a good many courting couples, yes. And one in particular, I remember, sitting on top of the short second class next to the engine. They had the umbrella up, and they were courting under this umbrella. I goes up with my hand lamp. Of course, it was in the night. I goes up with my hand lamp, shined the hand lamp on him. I tickets, please. He fumbled about. He eventually got his tickets. And I said, all right. I said, you can pull your umbrella down now. I said, so he looked up. He only had the ribs there. All the silk had burnt off with the cinder of the engine.
Well, tomorrow we'll be seeing the cinders coming out of an engine, and we hope that nobody's umbrella will suffer the same fate. Well, as a matter of fact, Mr. Bailey will be the conductor on the train we're going on now in a moment, and maybe, Mr. Bailey, this time, as it's a special occasion, you won't say fares please to us. Will you pass us by? Let us off, will you?
If you've got a pass, I will. Otherwise, you'll have to pay.
We'll have to pay, will we? Well, now, how much would we have to pay from here to Mumbles today?
Are you going all the way?
Yes,
or, 1 and 5 return.
And how much was it when you started?
When I started, it was 9p return.
Oh, it hasn't gone up too much, then, has it?
9p return second.
Yes.
And a shilling first.
But now it's all one class.
All one class.
And 1 and 5.
1 and 5.
All right, well, we'll have 17 pence. Thank you, Mr. Bailey. And if you've ever driven along the Mumbles Railway, you may have seen some little buildings alongside the line near Black Pill. Frankly, I never knew what the buildings were, and I've come down to find out. And to tell me is another, well, a comparative youngster in the firm service. He's only been about 25 years. That's Mr. Jimmy James, who's the foreman. Well, now, Mr. James, perhaps you can explain to us what exactly the company house within these stone buildings alongside the line.
Yes, we have two 500 rotary converters and a booster set, and we also have another substation which has two 500 kilowatt rectifiers.
Now, in order that I may understand, I'm quite sure most of the listeners do, but I don't, I take it that these in principle, are to convert the ordinary public supply of electricity for your own use. Is that it?
Yeah, so, convert AC to DC for the supply of the Mumbles Railway.
Suppose now the public power supply fails. What happens then?
Or if it's, well, when we get a fault on, when the corporation get a fault on one main, they switch out the cable with a bad fault, and they switch us onto a ring main then, and they quickly give us another supply.
How quickly? I mean, are the trams stranded for very long?
Oh, stranded probably for an half an hour. We had that about 3 weeks ago.
But it doesn't happen very often?
Not very often, no.
So no complaints from the passengers?
No, not perhaps once in 5 years.
Well, that's a very good record indeed, Mr. James. I must say that I was very impressed. You can probably hear in the background a great deal of noise, although outside it's fairly quiet. What exactly is happening in there now?
Oh, well, we just started up one of the rotary converters. And, of course, the row you've heard is that when you start up the rotary converter, the first thing that happens is a supply is given to the brush lifting gear for lifting the brushes off the rotary com. When the brushes are fully extended, that makes contact then and gives a supply to the high tension switch, which closes the switch. When the high tension switch is closed, that gives a supply of 6,600 volts to a transformer. It's transformed it to 660 volts to give to the rotary starting panel. Then the rotary starts up, and when she comes up to 3-part speed, there's a polarized motor there that chooses whether she comes up rightly or wrongly. If she comes up rightly, then you've got your main breaker coming in, and then your high-speed breaker, and that is quite the big rouse that you just heard.
Mr. James, whenever I travel on the Mumbles Railway in future, I'll always think of you when I pass Black Pill. I don't understand a word of what you're saying, but I know it's very necessary.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Well, any stranger getting on the Mumbles Railway train at Rutland Street would, I'm quite sure, be forgiven for not expecting so fascinating a length of railway as he eventually gets, because I know that any resident of Swansea would agree with me when I say that Rutland Street isn't exactly a very attractive part of Swansea. But get on the train there and then go along for 5 miles and you ride along one of the most fascinating lengths of railway line in the country. Well, I'm sitting right up in the front of a double coach with Mr. Wilfred Dravers, who is the general manager of the company. And this is Monday, and we're getting ready for tomorrow, the big day, with the 150th anniversary. We are, of course, on the 1954 version, but, Mr. Dravers, I understand that you have reconstructed for tomorrow's ceremony the horse-drawn and the steam-drawn versions of the train. How did you manage about the horse-drawn?
Well, we took it from an illustration of a coach which was used in 1819, which is the first coach of which there is any pictorial record, and we have copied that as faithfully as we can. There's nothing earlier than 1819 that there's any record about, but I rather suspect that the type of coach that was in use in those days was the one that was mostly used for carrying ore and lime with a couple of planks across for the passengers to sit in.
We hope it'll be more comfortable for the VIPs tomorrow.
Oh, yes, indeed. Yes, the one for the VIPs tomorrow. We've got the interior very nicely decorated, complete with button-up upholstery, which was always the thing in those days.
And how about the horse? I take it you haven't been able to get hold of the original horse.
No, the original horse was too much for us, because if you were to see the drawing, you'd notice it was only a two-legged horse.
So what have you got for tomorrow?
We've borrowed a horse from a local milkman, and we hope that she is going to do her stuff very well and not deposit the VIPs into the sea off the end of the pier or anything terrible like that.
And I do notice as we go along now, we're making the journey from Mumbles towards Rutland Street. As I look down, there has been some special gravel put down between the lines. I take it that's to help dear old Dolly.
That's to help the horse, yes. We put ashes down, otherwise she would trip up over the sleepers.
And how about the steam version?
The steam coach we have mocked up from an old picture of a second-class carriage which was in use at the end of the last century and the beginning of this century. We've had to cheat just a little bit with that because of the overhead wires which exist today. We had to make it a little lower than it actually should be, so that anybody riding on the top is in no danger of coming into contact with the overhead wires.
But is anybody on the top liable to the same thing as they used to be, of being covered in smut and smoke from the engine?
Oh, yes, indeed. Yes, that's part of the fun. It always was in the old days, and that will be reproduced tomorrow, I hope. The various people used to get smuts in their eyes, and they used to have to shake the soot off their dresses as they got to the terminus. And even though nobody must have regarded that as being a pleasant sort of thing to happen, people in Swansea still remember the days with nostalgia.
Well, I take it that everybody is going to be in costume tomorrow.
Everybody except the VIPs.
Mm-hmm. Well, we saw just a few minutes ago as we passed through Southend that the place was an absolute blaze of flags and there were special stands going up. I take it, Mr. Dravers, that everybody in Swansea has played ball very well in cooperating with you in preparing for tomorrow.
The cooperation has really been quite wonderful. I just can't speak too highly of it, both from organizations and from individuals. To quote one example alone, the Glamorgan County Cricket Club have lent us a number of portable stands in order that people who are watching the performance can see it in greater comfort. That's just one example. The man in the street, too, he's come along with all sorts of photographs and exhibits which we have used in our exhibition, which is also being open tomorrow and will be open for a fortnight.
And talking of the Glamorgan County Cricket Club, I think it's rather appropriate that we should be able to hear the toot-toot of the Mumbles Railway for once on the railway itself, because on so many occasions have we, when broadcasting cricket matches from St. Helens, heard that toot-toot from the line. And I've always noticed, Mr. Dravers, and I don't know whether I'm playing fair with the drivers in putting this to the general manager, but I have always noticed that invariably when there's a cricket match on, of course, which is the only time I'm there, the train always slows down.
Well, that's a good story, but it may be a disappointment to you and John Arlott and other cricket commentators to know that it isn't altogether true. In fact, the trains always have to go very slowly at that point, because on one side we have an entrance to the Swansea Bay station where accidents sometimes happen, and therefore the trains have to go very slowly. And on the other side there are some facing points and a foot crossing where there is always the danger that somebody might suddenly dash across the track.
Well, explanation accepted, but at the same time you will agree with me when I say that the top car passengers have got a good view of the scoreboard.
I quite agree, and I wouldn't go so far as to say that on cricket days the drivers don't go a little slower than at other times.
Well, on we go, and I should say that of all the times of day to travel on the Mumbles Railway, this is about the finest. Don't you think so?
Yeah, I quite agree.
You know, the tide in and
quite
all
agree.
that.
When the tide is in, the Swansea Bay looks simply lovely.
I'm told, by the way, we're coming up now towards Black Pill, that the corporation is thinking of doing a little addition of its own here.
At Blackpill, they are proposing to make some gardens, complete with children's paddling pool and so forth.
Oh, here we are here now.
Yes, here we are. and make it as small as a kind of Lido. They haven't really started on it yet. They'll probably have it going by next year.
Well, it should. It's a case of gilding the lily, as far as I'm concerned. Well, we'll be going on
The next place is Bryn Mill.
Bryn Mill, and then St Helens, and then on to Rutland Street. And at the moment, the weather's fine. We don't know what the weather forecast is. Mr. Dravers has been refusing to listen to or read any weather forecast. He's just crossing his fingers.
I'm keeping my fingers crossed for tomorrow, yes, hoping for the best and fearing the worst.
Well, let's see what happens tomorrow.